Well, the mystery of the German mountain unit that was missing has been solved. It was on the turn record track with a value that it does not have. Here in July, somehow, I don't know, it didn't. Well, the mystery of the German mountain unit that was missing has been solved. It was on the turn record track with a value that it does not have. Here in July, somehow, I don't know, it didn't get placed in the earlier and got placed in the later. Maybe because I found two counters with that name on it that I tried to determine which one to put where. But, you know, I mean, none of the values, well, the full strength value is there originally of the regular unit. Now it's been pulled out. It can never reach that full strength. That may be wrong. Maybe it can. Let's see. No, I can reach one under that full strength now. And then someday it upgrades to the assault unit, which doesn't really matter. I'm not going to worry about the numbers on the units. The hell with them. But you know, I mean, it's just such a headache dealing with setting up the reinforcements, placing them. And then when it comes to when they actually come in, usually you're withdrawing stuff. Oh, look, I forgot about a German replacement that has to find some place to live. Oh, well. So I didn't even finish the month. All right. Well, into July, and we'll throw the supplies out and see sometime late in this month, I think we're going to see an assault. So I basically just flew through about, 3 turns. Took about 5 minutes per turn, really. Plus I went and made some tea and everything. But you know what? Nothing's happening. It's just shifting these troops around. One of the problems is finding the units that are damaged so that you can recuperate them. This is more of a problem in a sense for the Germans because they actually were at a point where they had all their troops on the board. Otherwise, you could just keep building the units, the new units. Of course, you don't get enough replacements to build those up to full strength. And it's kind of nice to have full strength units, especially for an offensive. That's where the French are beginning to peter out now. They're out of their 6-point units damn near, which means I pretty much have to pull units off the line. But for example, with the Brits, I'm having trouble finding a damaged unit. I see some damage markers. They're flipped units, but it's hard to tell what can and can't be. So like this flip unit is flipped because it was a 9.5 BEF unit on the back. It's now a 7, and it's permanently that. So you really kind of have to investigate a lot of the counters to find one, and you kind of find them by accident. It's not like you have some, oh yeah, I know there's units here that need to be repaired. Because when you're trying to smooth the line, you're doing exactly the opposite to what's conducive to finding the units. You're spreading them around, shifting them everywhere, which way. So, you know, you end up with not a clear idea of what's where. Another thing to note, even the victory conditions, the demoralization factors, have a slight annoyance edge to me. I was noticing, oh, look, we're at 800 for the Germans now. They've caught up to the French. This is because of the 65 turn. I don't remember if I paid at the beginning of this turn. I don't really care. I ended up paying again because I think I forgot to. But that's not parity. Okay. Germany gets affected at 3,000. France gets affected at 1,500. These numbers cannot be compared. They're just numbers on a track related to numbers in the rules, and there's nothing to help you. That's kind of the problem I have with a lot of the feelings of the game. It doesn't feel like the designer put too much effort to make this easier to play. It's not a terribly complicated game, but the whole game, is kind of some innovative ideas on a very, very standard old time type framework. The innovative idea is the firepower table, and a number of other factors. Certainly the map with its little hex sides, etc. The demoralization for a game of this type. It's not, hey, you need these cities, because that's not what World War I was about. It's pretty clear. It's hard to tell what World War II. It's harder to tell what World War II was about. But World War I was clearly about just grinding the opponent's economy down, essentially, and their manpower, etc., their military ability to resist. So that all makes sense. But they're all put together in a way that doesn't terribly make it easier. Or more attractive, say, in the case of the map or whatever, but I don't know what you can do there. There's a point at which you have to make these compromises. You have to say, okay, either I have to cut the Gordian knot and come up with something completely different, or I have to trim away some of the mechanics, some of the complexity, whatever. It's not like there's a lot of complexity here. In order to provide something that's going to be able to reach more people. And I don't feel like this has done that. I feel like this has really refused to make those compromises and ended up in something that, as I've noted, is difficult to actually play. What I want to be doing is I want to be allocating, to some extent or another, these grand offensives, and it's certainly capable. It's certainly possible to do that, but I'm all tied up in this moving my units around and trying to get everything perfect, and these responses shifting back and forth. So the French have been pushing forces here into the Paris region. I've got to shift more of my German weight into that sector. I've got to worry about the British. For the British, they're at a point where actually they kind of need to attack because they need to kill some men. They're beginning to pool up replacement points. So they may need to do an offensive, just a minor one, just to kill some guys. To me, these are, I don't know, too many little piddly factors that are getting in the way of some sort of broad scheme. And in a sense, the actual motivation to why you're attacking, I got to kill men, I got to waste supply points, whatever it is part of the problem. It's not a grand scheme. It's I have to do these little administrative things to keep going. And it really doesn't make that much difference. I'm going to cause a certain amount of damage on my offensives, and I'm going to take a certain amount of damage. I don't want them to be too broad because, well, that may put me at risk. Of course, you could push your chances. You could say, okay, well, the Germans might run out of supply before I do, and then I'll get an advantage there or whatever. And that's what we saw, was the Germans managed to crush the French supply enough that they could take their, hey, I get the supplies at the first of the month. I get to maybe make a breakthrough on that turn, even if the fortification lines are in place, etc. I don't think we're going to be at that position again. I don't know. It doesn't feel like the Allies have that kind of desire to completely crush the Germans through that massive offensive. But maybe that's the right spirit to achieve the real goals. It's difficult for me to play that way, to try to break the other guy's supplies beforehand. I think that would produce the right dynamics, but it's tiresome. It's really tiresome for me to do that. I can appreciate that will cause realistic play, historical play. But I can also say, I'm not sure I want to do that. The calculation of the offensives, et cetera, is kind of painful. Especially when you run up against it and you do it for a few turns and you know you're not going to break through until you wear their supplies out. That's the tough call for me. Now, maybe it'll happen eventually. Maybe I'll push it that far eventually. But so far this year, I have not. And for all those wrong reasons, an Allied offensive is launched in the Paris salient. It's a weak spot for the Germans. It was a good place to hit. It's kind of interesting. It's almost always during the opponent's turn that I notice where I want to hit. Because it's basically where I'm saying, there's a weakness there. I got to do something about it. I can't. Well, as a player, I might be paying that attention too. But it's just kind of funny that it's always the moment where the enemy learns about that mistake and says, fuck it. It's just too hard. That I end up jumping in and slamming in. But this is one such case. Quite often when I'm playing in an opposed game, I'm sitting on something like that, and I'm getting away with it for a couple of turns saying, can I just get my troops there? Do I have time? That never happens here. Once I notice it, if I don't fix it, it's going to get slammed in a game like this, especially where there isn't any other controls. But that's okay. It provides, a framework for which those decisions end up being made, and that's fine. Anyway, it didn't work very well. The Allied forces, even with the artillery bonus, etc., took 11 hits versus 7 for the Germans. But the Brits really did need to damage their Canadians so that they can funnel. They have like one replacement chit for them, and they're going to get another one this next month. So they have to hit with those Canadians and get them damaged. They may have to hit another round. But now the Germans really do need to push into that area, especially this hex, and try to repair the situation there. Hopefully they have troops, but it doesn't look like it. Doesn't look like they have much. So they may have to try shifting stuff, which is always a royal pain. All right, on to the last turn of the month. And the turn ends with the assault continuing on this space here. The Allies got less strength into the play. The Germans actually got more by shifting this big old artillery, and granted it's only doubled instead of tripled, but that was able to give them more power in total. But their line is rather stretched at this point, and, well, it doesn't look like they have any withdrawals next turn, but they also don't have any reinforcements coming in. They've just got their replacement points. They got some troops that they're putting together up here that they can throw into that sector. And we can see if that's enough to stem the flow, because really, once that is stopped, the Allies, once it gets ugly enough in that area, the Allies don't really want to continue the attack. And elsewhere, it's ugly too. They don't want to make an attack here, even though they have the river line crossed and it's good terrain. They just don't have the strength. That's a pretty big stack there. So this is not the optimal assault any longer. You want to switch fronts. Well, to tell you the truth, nobody really needs to spend anything anymore. Why go in without sort of max strength, as it were? Well, maybe because the Germans are a little weaker, but they don't feel a lot weaker. And I just don't have that, I can grind them down before attitude. And, part of it is because I do know the history, and I do know that didn't work. They didn't really get that huge breakthrough in 15. Now, in 16, they got some significant ground broken through. But the situation just doesn't look like they're going to be able to break them. It was very easy for me with the Germans to continue the assaults that I was making. It's very hard for me to continue with the Allies here. I don't feel like I have any grasp. If I broke through the trench, if I got that initial breakthrough, then I would keep going. But without that initial breakthrough, well, now there are better places to attack. And why am I doing it this turn anyway? Just halt the whole thing. And there's no real cost to that, unlike in La Grande Guerre, where there is a cost to halting an offensive. You make a big deal about an offensive. You can make these minor attacks, and that's what I feel like I'm doing. But once you start a major offensive, whatever that is, and I feel like I already started one and it failed, there is a cost to the national will of, hey, we didn't get anywhere. We lost this many bodies. Yeah, maybe we killed more enemy, but that was hard to justify. The body bag mentality hadn't set in quite yet at this point. Anyway, up this one goes. Well, as I push into August, I notice, gee, I gave the French probably 3 extra replacement units that I shouldn't have. And now comes the real problem. Because every 10th French replacement unit, which happened to work out fine when they get odd even 1 2 1 2. Of course, the rules don't say that; they say 1 1. But clearly, that's a typo because they wouldn't have expressed it the way they did. That worked out so that they got a 10th one every turn. Now, I have no idea how to keep track of how many is every 10th. You know, I can keep a little marker, another little counter, or keep it on paper or something. But it's an annoyance because now they're only producing 7 a turn. So on the 3rd turn of next month, they're going to get one. And then on the 6th turn of the month, you know, I mean, it's just this annoyance where they get these North African special replacement units, which really don't do much except demand that it makes it harder to keep the North African units at full strength. You end up with a lot of smaller units, or maybe you have to direct something to the line, the replacements to a particular place in the line, pull a unit out, maybe direct another unit there so that you can fill its gap while it replenishes. Just more of that extreme fiddly aspect. Anyway, I'm going to say the hell with it, just as I did with the 65 German demoralization points I added last time. In this case, I know I made a mistake, but I don't know what to do. And I screwed up and gave the Germans an extra one earlier. And maybe, you know, they got the Belgians knocked out. So it's a different world, right? Anyway, but that's the point. When there's all this attempt to get this realism with such a significant effort to, you know, get all the numbers right and all the units that come in at the right time and in and out and everything. Well, it ends up, at least in this player's case, causing bigger problems with the historicity because I can't cope with, I can't manage the level of mechanical actions that's required for this game. So I end up screwing up more than I would in a game that would be less historically, you know, fine-tuned, but worried a little bit more about making it playable so you don't screw up all the time and end up making your actual play experience less historical than you would get with that simpler, cleaner system. Thus is. All right, well, I'll continue trying to set up my replacements and such now. So we break into August 1915, and I confused what I've already got on here. Probably taped it from over in the corner while I was setting up the lines. The offensives have stopped. The British were positioned themselves to set up for an offensive here, and then chose not to do it. It was just too expensive. And the big thing is, when I finally found, as I was setting it all up, the Canadian unit that I need to replenish, or that was in reasonably good shape, that I thought was in reasonably good shape at least. Well, it turns out I had damaged it last turn. So, you know, some of this is me walking away from the game. You can't. That's one of the problems. Every time you spend time away from the game, and I tend to play my games in little chunks, it becomes easier to forget things. And in this case, well, I don't need to launch an offensive because I've lost all the British units I need to. I counted up my French points, and Let me think. I better recount them. I don't know if I was at 115 or what, but I thought I was just at the level I need to be, which would be like 105, because that'll put me to 145. But I'm not sure now. I'm worried that I was at 145 and that I have to launch an offensive this month. If I don't have to launch one, I'm not going to. I'm going to continue to allow the Germans to take their withdrawals, because they aren't gaining anything this turn except replacement points. That allows them to strengthen, but I'm gaining replacement points too, and it just doesn't seem like an attack will tremendously help me. On the other hand, I've got most of my big units on the board, and the Germans have lost some significant units, so maybe it would be a good idea to make an attack this month anyway. I don't know. Still tossing the idea back and forth. But really, it's all determined by the, hey, what have I lost? What am I going to be putting on the line? Because if all I'm going to be able to rebuild is these 3-point units here, they're not going to help any offensive. They just plug the gaps as I'm repairing in between waves or something. All right, we'll see. I'll recount. But I think the French are in the position where they don't have to make one. They're certainly not continuing with anything this turn. Yeah, I count 175 points over here, which means they've got almost two whole months before they have to press another offensive. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I think this month and next month they probably will not. We'll see. Well, I just improved my life, and at least my gaming life, significantly, as well as the quality of the videos. I put in an incandescent bulb. Now, supposedly these green energy bulbs I had in here were supposed to be the equivalent of 100 watts of power. You saw that sepia tone and kind of darkness. One bulb I replaced, one, over in this lamp over here. And you're getting, it's only a 75 watt. It's just so much cleaner and clearer. It's just pathetic. What happened was my videos decreased in value and my vision and everything here, because my last incandescent bulb burned out, and I had invested in, I don't know, I had a couple boxes of these green ones and got a huge crate of them from my electric company for free. They're just crap. Anyway, what do we have here? Just more of the same. Both sides really just filling out. We're here on we just finished the 4th turn of August. And, I'm just going to keep playing through this until we get to a point where I have to make another assault. And winter assaults may be the advantageous ones, although they're kind of painful for the attacker. The attacker knows where he's going to land the blow. The defender doesn't. So it may become kind of, although it's unlikely because you can rail the headquarters around, get the supplies wherever you like. It might become a little bit more of a hassle for the defender to put something in place during winter. The game seems to have no other weather effects, so I think that may be a little weird. I don't know. Certainly I expect mud and stuff like that to come along. As I hit the 6th turn, I've covered it, I think. Somewhere in here I've got a unit, but let me show you the equivalent. It's over here, these Guards English divisions. They're kind of interesting. According to the rules, they're size 8, great. They have this red 8 on them. Now, all the replacements, I think, have either a red 7. Yeah, they all have a red 7 on them. I don't know what these things mean. Nothing can replace them by the rules. The number, the circle doesn't matter. The color of the circle matters in terms of, yes, it's a color or it's not. But it also has to have the correct number according to the rules, which is what prevents you from building, say, German units. Somewhere I have guards that have little -1 markers. There's one under here. But they have an 8 in the white circle. I don't know if that means that the British Guards can never be replaced. That's what the rules would tend to indicate. On the other hand, it feels a little goofy and a little bit of a disadvantage that they can't restock their Guards units in the same way that everyone else can, pretty much. It just disturbs me. I'm not sure that that's intended. The red 8 the 8 in there kind of indicates, yeah, I can pump my guards up to 8s. And that's how I'm taking it. But it's not clearly, it's not explained as any kind of exception in the rules. And it's one of those kind of, geez, I don't know. I don't know how much sense this makes, but the British Guard did receive reinforcements. Did it get as good as it ever was? How come the German Guards are limited to normal division size? And that's an irritation in terms of strength points, because I'd like to fix that additional hit so that I don't have stacks with the minuses on them. But that clearly is against the rules. But with those British 8 circled units, I think if I was playing by the rules, they couldn't be recuperated at all. Such as. All right, onward into the rest of the month. And we're pushing into September of 15. And, this has taken me 20 minutes since the late comment, right? At most. Anyway, the French have come to a decision. They want more firepower to hit hexes. Expending supply is never a big deal. That's your duty, essentially. Losing troops is a big deal, and making the enemy lose more troops is a good thing. Supply doesn't seem to be the limitation on your ability to act anymore. Well, I mean, it is. Obviously, if you had infinite supply, you could keep attacking and attacking and attacking, but your troops would wear out. On the other hand, supply is more this motivator in the way the game works. So I'm going to start expending my replacements to start building back those artillery. I can build them back at 2 for 1. Now, it's kind of weird because they're not really replacement points, but there's special rules to handle Marines, artillery, and maybe something else, mountain units, where their little numbered circles don't really count for what you'd think they would. There's no replacement artillery points, for example. You have to kind of buy them on the fly as you're rebuilding. Now, you can use 2 artillery units to recombine, or 2 mountain units or whatever. So they're kind of a little stickier in terms of you can't turn infantry into these things as normal. You can only use the replacements. And I like that aspect. But anyway, I'm going to have to start buying those back because basically I've got all my heavy units. Right now, there are some things I can rebuild. There's probably, I think there's some weak 4s back here that I may want to rebuild. But at some point, I'm going to start buying up the artillery for my offensive. And I want to do that soon because I want to be able to launch an as powerful as possible offensive, either here or here. That gives me an opportunity. I don't have to do both. I can do one or the other and then start swinging troops as needed to one side or the other of that bulge. There's an advantage to attacking on this front, which is that the Brits can throw into that same offensive. I can do a joint offensive that's less damaging to the French, and some of those powerful British infantry can help a great deal in getting a little bit more strength. Of course, there's a disadvantage to that. Largely, this is the only hex where the Brits are actually right in with the French. And, I'm not going to get as many British units as I'd like. They are better and more powerful, but just the way the front line has developed, I could push another British hex on the front, but that would string out the Brits and make them a little weaker than I'd like, although they've been getting a lot of replacements or a lot of reinforcements recently. So they actually could take another hex. And that would perhaps be a more powerful attack. But without limiting things, this just seems more appealing right now than over here. Can't be sure, though. If the Germans are weaker over here, I'll probably make an attack here or here. Or here. One of these 3 hexes. Well, I don't know. This up here is painful with the terrain. But these 2 hexes are both clear hexes, as is this one, as is this one. It gives me a lot of opportunities that I can choose from. The Germans have to defend all those hexes a little heavier than everything else. There are also some hexes where I've got 2 hexes facing one of theirs, which if those get stripped too weak, I'll make the choice on. Well, since this is the end of the month and it's a I was planning on trying to push another month into this video, but I think I'll just fit this one in, and that'll be the August month.
Recombination allows you to combine small and understrength units to create stronger units up to their full strength. In the upper right-hand corner of combat units, with a circle here, you see their full strength symbol. This is a colored circle containing a number, obviously. Units of the same nationality who have the exact same full strength symbol may combine with each other. Think of this process as combining coins and small bills of the same currency into larger bills. All you have to do is ensure that the amount of strength you end up with is what you had to begin with. Let's look at the example shown here. Here you have some German units, a 2-4 brigade, an understrength 3-5 reserve division, and an understrength 1-6 cavalry division, all in the same hex with a German headquarter. Note that both the 2-4 and 3-5 have an 8 in a white circle in the upper right-hand corner, so they are the same type and can recombine. The 1-6 understrength cavalry division with a black 2 and a yellow circle is a different type and therefore cannot be involved. Together, the two infantry units have a combined strength of 5. Recombination allows you to disband the 2-4 brigade, take it off the board, and put its strength into the reserve division to bring it back to 5-5 strength. This shows what it would look like after the recombination takes place. You had 5 strength points of infantry to start with, and you end with 5 strength points of infantry. It's just that they are now all in the reserve division, while the brigade no longer exists. In order to recombine, remember that units involved must be in the same hex as a headquarter, and not in an enemy zone of control. None of the units involved may have moved or participated in combat the turn that recombination takes place. Note that the headquarter is allowed to provide supply points to other units. It just cannot have moved or defended itself during the turn. Replacement units have RPL as their unit designation. Replacement units, like this one you see here, are not combat units. They don't have zones of control, they cannot attack or counterattack, and they cannot be used to satisfy the loss requirements of a combat. They exist only to recombine with other units or to bring units back from the dead pile, which I'll explain shortly. Replacement units contain replacement personnel and equipment for combat units. You use replacement units during recombination to increase the strength of the reduced units or to bring units back that were previously removed from the map. Any unit with a combat strength of 0 is removed from the map. In reality, these units are not completely gone, just their combat power is. The leadership, staff, and administration still exist. By using replacement units, or any combination of other units, units in the dead pile can be brought back into the game. They are brought back at the strength of the RPL and other strength used in recombination. The Russian 30th Infantry Division that you see here was previously removed from the map when it was reduced through combat to a strength of 0. Looking over here in hex 2504, we see that there is a headquarter along with a Russian 3-3 RPL unit and a 2-4 infantry brigade. During the recombination reinforcement phase, the Russian player can use these 5 strength points of infantry to bring back the 30th Division into hex 2504 at a full 4 strength points. In doing so, the replacement unit is removed from the board and the other brigade is reduced to 1 strength. As before, the Russians had 5 strength points to begin recombination with in Hex 2504, and at the end of recombination, they still have 5 strength points in the hex. World War I was mainly a war of attrition. Countries and their armies typically did not give up until they had become completely demoralized over the magnitude of the losses that they had suffered. This increasing demoralization is what in the end led to mutinies, revolutions, and ultimately surrender. The games track the losses that armies suffer in terms of demoralization points, which are also called DM points. The comparison of demoralization points between players usually determines the winner and loser of a campaign or scenario. Players keep track of DM points they accumulate on the points track using their appropriate DM markers. Note that in the case shown here, the German player has 34 DM points, while the Russian has 62. Countries take DM points as a result of the enemy entering their cities, but most DM points are accrued as the result of losses in normal combat. A country takes 1 DM point for every strength point of infantry lost in normal combat, while the penalty is double for cavalry strength points. Here's a simple example. In this combat, the German player loses 5 infantry and 2 cavalry strength points. Meanwhile, the Russian player loses 5 infantry strength points. The German player would take 4 demoralization points for the cavalry losses, plus another 5 for the infantry losses, for a total of 9 demoralization points. Meanwhile, the Russian player would take 5 DM points for losing 5 of his infantry strength points. The normal DM rates for losses are doubled when units take losses while surrounded. This is because losses while surrounded involve some degree of troops surrendering, and in surrendering, units also lose their leadership and administrative staffs. A unit or group of units are surrounded when they cannot trace a line of communication to a friendly map edge. A line of communication is a path of hexes of any length that does not include a hex occupied by an enemy unit or an unoccupied hex containing an enemy zone of control. In this example, the Russian units in hexes 1513, 1612, 1713, and 1714 are surrounded. There is a ring of hexes, shown in gray, either containing German units or unoccupied hexes containing German zones of control around these units. This ring prevents the Russian units from tracing a line of communication to the south or east map edges, which are the map edges friendly to the Russian, as these are Russian territory. In this change to the previous example, the ring around the previously surrounded Russian units is broken by the Russian cavalry division in 1514. The previously surrounded Russian units can now trace a line of communication through 1514 and then on through 1414, which does not contain a German zone of control, and then on to the south map edge. Because of the Russian unit in hex 1514, none of the Russian units shown are now surrounded. If units are surrounded, their best option is to move to get out of this situation. In this situation from the first example, Russian units can and should move to get out of being surrounded. Each of them should, during the movement phase, probably move to the south, and this would change their situation. Units that stay surrounded for a full turn and are not surrounded together with a fortress are eliminated. The units surrendered, and the owning player will take a lot of DM points as a result. Here is another situation of units who are surrounded. In this case, they can't get out of it by moving. German units block the way, so they will try a breakout attack against the German cavalry division in 1613. Since the 25th and 28th Russian divisions are surrounded, they will attack at 1/4 normal strength. To make the attack, each division must first lose 1 strength point. These 2 strength points are considered lost to surrender prior to the combat, so the 2 surrounded divisions can use 6 remaining strength points, which, due to their situation, are effectively quartered to 1.5, which is then rounded down to 1. As part of the breakout attempt, the Russian 27th Division also participates. The Russian player expends a supply point from the 2nd Army headquarters to supply this division's attack. So the Russian would attack the German cavalry with a total of 5 strength points, 4 from the supplied and unsurrounded 27th Division, and 1 from the surrounded units, as explained previously. Let's say the Russian player rolls a 3 and forces the German cavalry division to retreat. Furthermore, let's say the German, who counterattacks with a strength of 4, rolls a 5, resulting in a strength point loss for the Russians. The results are shown here. The Russians would lose 3 strength points, 2 strength points to enable the surrounded units to attack, and another loss due to the German counterattack. All 3 of these strength point losses would come from the 2 surrounded Russian units and would be considered lost while surrounded, so the Russians would take 6 DM points for these losses. But the German cavalry would retreat to 1514, and the Russian 25th and 28th divisions would be able to advance after combat into 1613, and thus get out of being surrounded. Fortresses are a big support to surrounded units. The German units in 2008 and 2009 are surrounded by the Russians, but note that there is a German fortress in 2009. The presence of the fortress in the pocket, that is the surrounded area, prevents the surrounded units from having to surrender if they are surrounded for a full turn. This is because the units can live off of the stockpiles in the fortress. Also, if the German unit in 2008 were attacked and had to retreat, it could retreat into 2009. Normally, surrounded units cannot retreat from an enemy zone of control to another hex also in an enemy zone of control, even if the retreat destination contains a friendly unit. But because hex 2009 contains a German fortress, the unit in 2008 can retreat into that hex. Note that Russian units surrounded together with a fortress won't be as well off. This is because, as was pointed out in the video on fortresses, surrounded Russian fortresses lose 6 strength points per turn and are eliminated the instant their strength falls below 4.
Well, crapola. Turns out I was not cheating in favor of the French. I was doing the correct thing when I was giving them every other turn 2 replacement. Well, no, I mean, by the rules, actually it's 1 in each, but I think the intention was to give 2. Anyway, again, I'm not going to worry about it. The hell with it. I'm not going to give them the extra points. But it doesn't happen until June of 16. That's what I thought originally. And why I was kind of ignoring that and not looking it up and everything every turn. This is the time when you do have to start looking up, though, because I see this is September and October, the German replacement points go up and their supply points go up. But the point is, when you got to page through this book back and forth to find these things, it is kind of an irritation, especially when very little of the rest of the game. Yeah. So what things take me time in the game? It's the things I've mentioned, shifting stuff around, which it feels like bullshit to me. Looking up where my reinforcements are, finding the correct ones. So, it took me a couple minutes to find my 9-5 guard units that are a rare kind of unit. You could say, well, that's your sorting problem. You need more than 3 counter trays to handle the game. Well, 3 counter trays handles Europa Universalis. This game has significantly less counters, I think, total, and certainly less on the board, less need to grab them, But anyway, with all the different unit strengths, etc., it is an irritation, even when you're not looking for specific numbered units. Now, going beyond that, you're paging through, getting irritated by it, and then you got to keep looking up, hey, what supplies come this month? There's no easy to find player aid that should be included in the game to just kind of give you that stuff for the grand campaign. Now, maybe the person whom I know is the biggest proponent of this game, at least online, says you never plays the grand campaign. It's too, it gets too tedious. I can get that. I really can. As an operational game, playing Schlieffenplan felt okay. It really did. It felt pretty good. At this point, though, the big thing that's turning me off is the way this is organized and the way the counters are having to cope with the different counters. But largely, there's not a lot of swapping going on right now. So it's okay. But now I'm coming up against, you didn't read that right. You didn't find, you got to page through. You got to flip-flop back and forth between these pages. You got to find this. It's just the presentation of these things is a pain in the butt. It really is. And there is no reason for it. There really, probably someone has a player aid somewhere printed up. If so, the best thing the game designer can do is point to that. Say, hey, you want this copy, not the one I printed in the rule book. And, this is not a matter where the silver edition improves. It doesn't. It's got the same kind of layout where everything's there, with the exception, perhaps, this little weirdness where there's a typo or something. That may not be corrected. I don't know. I didn't look it up. I know some of the things were not somewhere. Many were. But a little bit of thinking about presenting that, I think, could come up with a much better format where you don't have to flip through, where these 10-minute turns where you're really not doing much play-wise anyway. You're really just shifting troops around. It's not that miserable an experience, except the things that really get in your way. Finding the correct counter, looking through here to find out, to try to remember what's going on, whatever. When you string it all together, a game that I think could probably be done in less than 50 hours for the whole war for this front. Because I think each month is about an hour once you get down to it. The Schlieffenplan period is so fluid, and you really do need to play heavily. But yeah, I don't think this is that ridiculously long a game. And actually, if it were all presented well, if it were all packaged up so you could do the grand campaign smoothly, it's not outside of the reach of what I'd be willing to do. But, but seeing how this is presented, maybe if I didn't have a lot of games that I wanted to play, maybe I would put together the presentation that would work for me. And I bet you it would work better for a lot of people because it wouldn't be too hard. It would indicate the supply points in with the reinforcements, not just a paragraph, a line here and there to remind you of what you're getting, how many replacement points you're getting each month. What are special units that you have to worry about? Obviously, the mountains are okay, but some of them, like the colonials and stuff, aren't distinguished correctly. This would take probably 20 hours to put together, though, right? And in a game that's already taking me 50 hours plus whatever time I have to hunt down these aspects. I mean, it probably would be an equivalent, not too much heavier cost than just trying to play the game through and putting something together that would work very well. But that's something that I believe is part of what the designer's effort or his playtesters or whomever he's relying on to kind of tighten things up. The developer really, to come together and say, "Hey, this is what we need here." We need to put something together so that people can play this without the hassle. Now, of course, eventually, if enough people like it, somebody will do that work, and maybe they already have. I'm just not aware of it because no one has pointed me to that and said, "Hey, this is what you need." And then, of course, well, I don't have a printer, so I would end up, well, do I want to spend a couple of hours going out to Kinko's or whatever to get a copy of this? And I don't know. I really don't know because I very much rely upon what the game package comes with, and I think I'm probably at the extreme on that, but I don't think I'm alone on it. I think there are a significant number of people who expect a game to come with more or less what you need for it. Well, the Germans open up the new month by commencing a bombardment of Paris again. They had some 42 strength points of artillery that cost 11 supply. Great. French have no artillery there, so they can't respond at all. Now, the 42 strength points is halved because of the terrain. So that drops it to 21. But with so many units here, it's a +4 to the table. They did 5 points of damage to the fortification. They do 5 demoralization points by attacking. And the French don't get to respond at all. It's just a cost of supply for demoralization points. Yes, it's a high ratio, but they're not taking any demoralization from it. Of course, they're taking their 65 a turn, but they don't have an attack that they want to make. They might be able to afford one. They just don't want to do it if they could win more points on a defensive battle. Here's the problem. The problem is the advantage goes to the attacker. So if they could launch a significant offensive down here in the south, for example, they could cause more damage than they're getting, but the terrain favors the French, and it just seems like a safer thing to bomb Paris while it's there. There are other fortifications I could pick a point off of here and there probably pretty easily, but this seemed like the most valuable option. One thing I got to keep in mind, the Belgians count as French demoralization points in all these later scenarios. So it might be worth going and picking on these Belgians at some point. I'm not sure how easy a job it is, but it's one of the few rules from the scenarios that seems to apply to this whole situation rather than the most of the others, the special rules are really situational things. I haven't seen many at all. For example, Falkenheim, not really being in favor of an all-out assault on Verdun, which ends up, getting overruled eventually. Anyway, that's what the Germans are doing. I don't think the French are going to launch an offensive yet. Let's see where their points end up. Well, September brought exciting things. To begin with, the French lost. I miscounted, and they ran their supply totals above the 150 they're allowed. It can never advance above that, so they would have lost. Well, the hell with that. I let them make assaults. They had to make two. They made a massive one here in conjunction with the Allies, or with the Brits. This is the one they wanted to make against here. It did more damage than they took. Assaults are good. They really are, because you get to mass more firepower. You get 3 hexes. It's unlikely you're hitting a fully stacked hex. Yes, you've got a -2 against you, but in general, you tend to do damage when you assault, if you have the troops to do it. If you don't, you can't. This was kind of a surprise assault for the French. They were expecting to do this at the end of this month, not the beginning. But anyway, then they found we still don't have enough. We're still over by a few points. So they launched another assault here, and you can see they broke through. And now we have, sorry about that, our first instances of devastated hexes. These cost extra movement. The Germans have been pinched back. This did not work out well for the Germans at all, but you know, I think they were only being fair letting the French get an assault in, since they couldn't see the chart, and the French could have been cheating this whole time and just not told them, right? All right. Anyway, it doesn't seem a reasonable thing to throw the whole game away just because of a mistake like that. But yeah, we're going to see something interesting start to happen. The German line is crumbling. The French can make mobile attacks to try to strike in here and then try to wind their way around these one or both of the fronts and try to really get a significant breakthrough. Right now, they've got 1 hex. That's all they've got, but they can probably take advantage of that. And we've seen before where it's much, much easier. They got a massive 6 on their die roll. With a -2, it ended up doing 21 points of damage. That was exactly the number of strength points the Germans had in this location. So it only did 14 points. The Germans came back and did, I don't know, 8 to the French. But this is looking kind of interesting. It looks like an offensive's actually going to work here. Kind of early for that to happen, huh? All right, we'll see. Probably mainly, I mean, the Germans have a lot more strength down here and not as much where the French were actually set up to make the attack more easily. They could have made it in either place fairly easily. But the French were able to get almost maximum strength on here. I don't know what it was, 120 strength points or something like that for 3 hexes. They were a couple of points behind, less artillery than they could possibly have. And at least a couple of units weren't full 6-pointers or something. At least one, I don't know. But pretty impressive, actually. We'll see how that develops. Well, after that initial kind of impressive breakthrough here, the French launched a series of attacks. The Germans had placed a real barrier in the way. There was no way I was just going to punch that out of the way with a stack, even if it was a full strength stack of, 36 plus, say, 9, 45. The most that could do is 11. There's more than 22 strength points for the Germans here, so I'm not going to get a breakthrough. Yeah, maybe I could get an advantage there, but triple Germans are going to do a lot of damage back. I don't think that I can even win the attrition fight there. So what I decide is, well, the Germans had to strip things off. So I slammed a bunch of units up here, pushed some here with the artillery, tried to punch through here, failed, then did a combined attack here, shifted down to this side of the front, slammed them here, and then moved the British and the French artillery into place to slam this hex. This one got strengthened because that was where the assault had been, just sliding across the front. Nothing worked, and really heavy losses for the Allied forces here. The bright moment of the breakthrough has turned into something of a nightmare here, where the Allies are, because they saw a possible success, and if they could break through and kind of, maybe make some kind of pocket here, wow, that would be humongous, right? Well, that doesn't appear to be happening. And in fact, French supplies are a problem now. Remember, they were up near 150. Now they're at 40, 60, maybe a little under 100. I've got to shift some of them around. Supposedly that's supposed to happen before you make your attacks, but I like to do it afterwards because otherwise I have to calculate all the points for the attack first and then calculate them again. And that's just, that's the kind of shortcuts that I like to take in a game. And in this particular case, it works well with this, as really do a lot of other factors just to make it a little easier. If you play things exactly by the rules and very strictly and procedurally, like you have to with some games, this game, refreshingly compared to some of the things that I've seen recently, you can kind of twist and turn things a little bit, and it's no big deal. So if you have an advantage in terms of efficiency to playing something, I'm thinking here particularly something like Krieg, where damn, you have to, if you don't follow it precisely, you can't do anything to make life easier. If you try to, you're probably going to violate the game in some significant way. And I was doing that consistently when I was playing it, because my natural tendency is to try to make life a little easier on myself. Anyway, with this, it's very easy to do with these kind of things. You can just, move the supplies around afterwards when you're not supposed to. I don't know if the assault can continue, though. Maybe a limited assault up here, maybe a limited assault in one of these sectors. If the Germans have to loosen something up and weaken something, we might see one. But there's a lot of German troops. This was a fluke. The Germans left a part of the line kind of weak, and the French got one hell of a die roll there, and just precisely matched the full strength of the Germans, therefore getting the breakthrough. Now that their attention is drawn there, well, now there's a big boot plug in the way. Again, a quick opportunistic switch in the axis of the attacks. First, the English switched all the way up to here in the north and made an assault up here. And this is actually, this is the only way you kind of get these. I think the way that you get an advantage in this, but it seems completely ahistorical to me, is as the enemy starts throwing their defensive forces into the weak spots that you've already accumulated your force against, other weak spots develop, and you can shift your army fairly quickly. There's no chance, for example, of the English and French hitting any of these in here. They're just so potent. But the English saw an opportunity where this hex was now a little weaker, and maybe they couldn't break through, but they at least had a chance of bleeding. It didn't go well. They got bad rolls. And also, the French switched their attack to this side of Paris, just swapped around. Remember, they had made assaults, I don't remember where, everywhere, all over the place. I think here and here. Now they've switched over to here. It's like this dancing attacks all over the place. Now, that may be true of certain points of the war, but not this era. And that kind of disturbs me a little bit, that these tactics that took a while to kind of develop, the broad front attacks, for example, or whatever, you can't do the broad front attacks, but you can open up new assaults all over the place and just keep, halting your old ones. It may seem reasonable, but it didn't happen. The army, once moving in a certain location, pretty much kept moving there. Anyway, the French are really kind of stretching their supplies. They're getting cut way down. The assault here didn't work. It came damn close. There was just an Imperial Guard under there. It looked like there were more counters there. The artillery was there to bolster the defense. They came within 1 point of taking the Guard out with a not terribly good roll. The Germans have to cover that space. But assuming that they do, the French are they're not likely to attack. They're out of supplies. And given that they're not likely to attack, the English are probably not going to attack either. Build up their own capacity a little further. And the assaults are definitely petering out. The French found places where they kind of would have liked to have attacked, but not where they've attacked before, and not here where the breach is. Over here, they don't have quite the strength. They may end up launching another assault if that stays open. The English continued their assaults here, but those are also petering out. Big German reinforcements came in near Paris, preventing, they railed up there, preventing the French from being able to get a breakthrough there. And actually, if you think about it, the defensive bonus that the Germans have too, because of their rail capacity, they can just rail up to a location and throw the troops in a way that the French really can't. The French have to have the troops in that salient to defend. The Germans aren't launching any attacks right now. They may in the future. I would hope they have desires to do so within the game. But at this point, they really haven't. But that really told against the French, not being able to throw more stuff in the line that just came in. Anyway, we'll see what the rest of the month brings. I forgot to move this unit. Well, the rest of September passed without incident, and we can see the line is pretty much the same as it has been. I just like following it. We got this one little bump right here. That's the one little difference. Now there's devastated hexes here. The French will dig in here. The Germans will dig in here. And pretty soon it's going to be almost undistinguishable that there was even a battle there. And then curving up along here, we're all the same. Just repositioning troops, fiddling around, changing values, stacking, unstacking, playing with all the pieces. All fast, very easy. Not a lot of effort there. Now I got to spend, the 20 minutes setting up, or nah, it's not going to be that long because I'm not looking for individual uses. It depends on what ends up coming up, but 10 minutes or so setting up the next month. It's not really a big expense once you, especially if you start setting the halberd, and I'm not going to be that careful. Anyway, up this goes.